What was the creepiest experience in your own home? Story 1. In a house living with my girlfriend and another couple. I am watching television at around 2 in the morning in the living room. My girlfriend is asleep, the other guy's asleep, and I assume the other girl is out in her study, which you had to go outside to get to, so the back door's unlocked. From my vantage point, you can see a portion of the kitchen, which is next to the back door. I hear the back door swing open, assume it is my housemate, and continue watching my television show. About 15 minutes later, I happen to glance through the doorway into the kitchen, as I had not heard my housemate either leave the house again or wander through to the bedrooms. The house is quite loud, and there is a guy standing in the corner of the kitchen staring at me. He had a brown jacket on, dark eyes and dark hair, and was clutching a bottle of my Midori, shoulders slumped, staring at me. When he sees that I have noticed him, he moves. I get up from the floor and chase him to the kitchen, but he is gone. I carefully go out the back, nobody there. Out the front, nope. In the driveway, down the street, just nowhere to be found. It still gives me chills thinking about it. Story 2. This is when I was in high school. I am relaxing in the living room with my dog sleeping by my feet watching television, when suddenly my dog jumps up and runs to the stairs, which are right off the living room. Now my dog would normally never bark unless the doorbell rang. This time he went into attack mode, growling, barking, his hair rising on end. Then he would look at me trying to see if I would call him back. I was terrified. No one could have come home because you have to come through the living room to get to the stairs so no one could sneak in. After a minute, he would not let up. He kept acting like something was there, just something I could not see. I had to sit there as my dog was acting like he was ready to rip someone's throat, until finally he walked back to my feet looking proud of himself. I like to think he scared something off that day, but I was very happy when we moved. Story 3. My old house was just creepy. There are no other words to describe it. There are 3 occasions I will tell you about. Situation 1, it is about midnight. The kids and I are woken up by noises in the basement. Yes, they were still sleeping in bed with my husband and me at that point. I tell my husband it sounds like someone is in the house and to go check it out. We continue to hear doors opening and closing, and it sounds like stuff is getting thrown around. We do not have guns or a dog or any way to defend ourselves against an intruder. So I do what any grown woman would do and call my dad. He has 20+ years of military experience and a large gun collection. So I have my husband sneak out of our room and unlock the door for my dad to come in. Then we all hide in my bedroom with the door locked. Anyway, as you may have figured, the house was completely empty, and there was no sign anyone had even been in the house at all. Situation 2, I get home late after a long day at work. It is 2 in the morning, and my husband is asleep on the couch, and the kids are asleep in a pile of blankets on the floor next to him. So I decide to take a bath and relax and unwind before heading to bed myself. While I am in the tub, someone starts pounding on the door and wiggling the doorknob. I figure it is my 4-year-old panicking because sometimes she sleepwalks when she has to pee, and so I hop out of the tub so I can open the door and get her on the toilet before she has an accident. When I open the door, no one is there. No one is in the hallway. I grab my towel and walk to the living room, and everyone is still right where I left them, all still asleep. Situation 3, it is bedtime again. I am sitting in my bed talking to my daughter, getting her ready for sleep. All of a sudden, she starts crying hysterically and hiding in me. Was she hurt? What was wrong? Does she need to go to the emergency room? I was worried, and she would not tell me what was wrong, but she was terrified of something. Finally, she looks up at me and says, "He is standing right there," and points to an empty corner. Who is standing right there? The man with no eyes. Story 4. My house is pretty old, over 100 years, and I believe it to be haunted. It makes a bunch of noises normally, but I am used to it now and dismiss most of the noises as just the house doing things. If a ghost hunting crew came in, though, they would have a field day with all the bumps in the night my house makes. But one time something was different. I was home alone and decided to relax and take a bath and use my vaporizer. I am finishing up and drying myself off when I hear someone saying my name outside the door. It must be my parents' home, and they can smell the vapor. I start to hide everything, but I can still hear someone who sounds like my mom calling for me. I tell them to hold on a minute, so I finish hiding everything. That is when there starts a loud banging right on the bathroom door. I thought they must be angry. I accept my fate and open the bathroom door to find there is no one there on the floor. Strange. I check the whole house and no one is home. I call my brother to see if he stopped in real quick to grab something or anything, and he says no. I explain to him what just happened, and he is trying to help me come up with an explanation, and none are checking out. I tell him I'm going to go check upstairs again. I am working my way up the stairs, and not even halfway there, I hear something get knocked off a table or something. I turned around and left immediately. We still live in the house. Story 5. Back in junior high, the first time my parents left town and left me alone for a week. It is going well. I stayed in the basement, and the entrance to the hallway that leads to my room had decorative beads hanging in the entryway. I am in my room watching television with my faithful dog, Smokey, laying at the foot of the bed. All of a sudden, he starts barking wildly, a bark I had never heard out of him, almost a cry. I think something is wrong with him, and just as I almost get a hand on him, he jumps off the bed and dives under it, completely silent. I get to the floor to look under the bed for him, and I hear the beads in the entryway start to rattle together as if someone ran into them with a lot of force. I sit there terrified for a bit, then grab a bat and investigate. The beads are still swinging with force. Every door and window in the house is still locked from the inside. There are not any air vents close to the beads, and Smokey refused to come out from under the bed for another 2 hours. To this day, I have no idea what caused those beads to rattle. Story 6. This happened about 15 years ago. My mom works nights as a nurse, and my brothers had moved out, so it was only my dad and me at home. The night in question, I was reading in bed, and my dad was asleep. I could tell by the snoring. I heard some light tapping on the front door, which was a sliding glass door. My room had a window where I could see the front door, so I sat up to look out my window. Nothing, and I thought maybe it was the wind. I kept reading, and about 20 seconds later, I heard really loud scratching on the back door, so loud that it woke up my dad, which was strange. He yelled out asking what I was doing and telling me to get in bed, and I yelled back that I was already in bed. Not a second after the words left my mouth, we heard loud rush footsteps, soft sounding, like running on wooden floors with socks on, heading toward the front door. As I sat up to look while shaking violently, I saw the front door had stopped sliding and was open about 8 inches. It had not been open when I looked earlier, but I could not see anything. My dad ran into my room, checked if I was all right, then went outside and came back in, closing the front door and checking the back door, which was still locked. I could not get to sleep, and my dad stayed up with me because I was terrified. What made it even stranger was that my dad had locked the front door that night, as he always did after saying goodbye to my mom when she left for work. We did not really talk about it that night. I must have been about 12 or 13 and still innocent, but a few years later we did. We thought it could have been someone trying to rob us or worse, but we could never figure out how they unlocked the front door since it had a pin and a lock that could only be opened from the inside. I tried to convince him it was a ghost, but he never accepted that, and I just think we may have been incredibly lucky. The scratching sound on the back door still haunts my dreams, and I still wonder why someone would scratch at the back door or tap on the front door before entering. Story 7. For Christmas 2012, my mom got my dad a really nice watch. By March, he had lost it for a few days, but then found it in the cushions of a chair in the living room. Then in early June, he lost it again, as he is very scatterbrained. He assumed he probably lost it in the cushions again, so he checked the couch and the chair but could not find it. My brother, my dad, and I decided to look harder and completely tore apart the house looking for it. We flipped every cushion, checked every drawer, closet, purse, gym bag, and bed in the entire house, leaving no stone unturned. We still could not find it. My dad checked his car, his workplace, the gym, my grandparents' house, and asked everyone he came across if they had seen his watch. After a few weeks of searching, he gave up and accepted that maybe someone at work or the gym stole it, or that he left it at a doctor's office or somewhere similar, and he assumed he would never see it again. Fast forward to the middle of July. My dad works very strange hours, and on that day he had to leave for work at 3:30 in the morning. When he woke up, my mom and brother were asleep, and I was staying at my best friend's house. When he came downstairs, he found the lost watch sitting on the kitchen counter face down, as if he had taken it off the night before and set it there. He assumed one of us found it after he went to bed, so he texted my mom thanking her. She replied saying that neither she nor my brother had found it, and there was no way I could have placed it there since I was not home. My mom had cleaned the kitchen before bed, and there was no watch on the counter then, but when my dad woke up, the watch that had been missing for over a month had simply reappeared. No one knows how it got there, and my dad still thinks maybe everyone is messing with him and that one of us hid it and put it back as a joke. Story 8. I lived in a haunted house. Shortly after moving in, I constantly felt like someone was behind me, especially when I was cooking. A few months later, I rounded a corner and saw a man standing at the fireplace, clearly visible, but he disappeared instantly. I researched the house and learned it had been built by that man and that he died in the living room next to the fireplace of natural causes. His wife also died in the house years later, and the home had been abandoned for 6 years before I bought it. They had 2 sons in that house. I felt the man's presence constantly, but I was not afraid, as he felt curious or protective. After I gave birth to a baby boy, the presence became daily. One night I heard playing sounds coming from the nursery even though the baby was too young to get out of his crib. Later, when my son started to speak, he asked who the man was that played with him at night. When my son was 2 years old, he had what should have been a fatal accident, riding a wheeled toy down a very steep staircase that ended in a wall. I watched in horror, but halfway down the stairs it looked like my son was lifted off the toy and gently placed on the stair while the toy crashed into the wall, leaving a dent. I could not speak, but I felt the presence strongly. The last event happened when metal baker's shelves filled with china and glassware fell over during the night. The crash was extremely loud. I ran to the basement and saw the shelves on the floor, but instead of shattered dishes, every piece was neatly stacked on the concrete and nothing was broken. I eventually sold the house for other reasons, but no one seems able to live there, as there have been 6 owners in 9 years. Maybe they just need to tell George, that was his name, to leave them alone, because he was not a bad guy. Story 9. For background, I live with a roommate on the ground floor of what is basically a duplex. The downstairs unit is the basement, and we share nothing with the tenant renting it other than the backyard. Basically, my roommate and I are the only ones going in and out of our part of the house. My roommate works as a waitress at a nightclub, so she is gone from 7 at night to around 3 or 4 in the morning. I usually go to bed around 11 or 12. It should also be noted that my dog has some strange habits. He is quite restless and a light sleeper. He gets up in the middle of the night and whines to be let outside even when he does not need to go. And whenever he hears my roommate come home in the early morning, he gets up to go see her. He also occasionally barks at either the front or back doors, like he sees someone outside. The same bark he uses when he sees the dogs from downstairs playing out back. But most of the time, when I get up to check, there is nothing there. Although once he was barking at a squirrel in our trash that I did not notice until I was right next to him. Last night followed the same routine. I went to bed at about 10 since my sleep schedule was thrown off by a recent overnight shift at work. I left the front door unlocked for when my roommate got home, since she is usually tired and irritated, and fumbling with keys in the dim porch light only makes that worse. I planned to watch a movie in bed, but fell asleep about 10 minutes into it. As expected, my dog woke up a few hours later to go outside. My bedroom door does not latch but opens inward, so he cannot open it himself and just stares at it and whines until he wakes me up. I would normally leave it open so he could go to the back door and whine while I slept, but I cannot sleep with the door open because it has unsettled me since I was a kid, and I suspect my dog is smart enough to just come back and whine in my face anyway. I got up, let him out back, went to the bathroom, called him back inside, and returned to bed with him beside me. As predicted again, he woke up when my roommate came home. She opened my bedroom door for him, and he went out to see her, and neither of them made enough noise to keep me awake. In the morning, I woke up and tried to be quiet so my roommate could sleep in, and the first thing I noticed was that my bedroom door was wide open, which always unsettles me a little. It was not unusual, though, since the door does not latch, and my dog pushes it open when he wants to come back in. I walked down the hall quietly and noticed that my roommate had not locked the front door after coming home, which annoyed me until I realized her car was not in the driveway. Then I remembered she said she would be staying at her mom's a couple nights ago, and since I did not see her at all the day before, it must have been a longer stay than I thought. Miscommunication. I left the door unlocked all night for no reason. That realization settled fine with me, until I remembered that I was not the one who opened my bedroom door last night. Story 10. I do not believe in ghosts or spirits and consider myself an agnostic deist. This happened about 3 years ago in a house my wife and I rented. The house itself was about 110 years old, so it already had a creepy feel. After we moved in, my wife started telling me about odd things happening, like kitchen cabinets swinging open when she left the room, or the radio turning off even though it used a turn knob and not a button. Our daughter was 2 years old at the time, and we still used baby monitors, and occasionally we would hear her having conversations in her room at night. Being skeptical and knowing she was only 2, I did not think much of it, even when we found things moved around in her room, even though she could not climb out of her crib and the door was always closed. It got worse when my wife said that every time she laid in bed upstairs, she felt someone sit on the bed with her, which I assumed was the cat. But after that, she refused to go to bed without me. One night around 2 in the morning, my wife woke me up in a panic saying something was inside the air conditioner hose, and it was violently shaking, the kind of hose that vents out a window like a dryer. I thought a rodent might have gotten into it and assumed that turning it on would force it out. Although later I realized that was unlikely since the window screen was intact and there were no holes. Irritated at being woken up, I told my wife to go back to bed. She said she needed to use the bathroom first, and I lay back down. Less than a minute later, she ran out of the bathroom saying the shower curtain had been pushed from the inside. At that point, I was wide awake and extremely annoyed, assuming she was imagining things. We lay in bed for a few minutes with my wife clinging to me when I heard without any doubt the sound of someone walking into our bedroom. I did not see anything, but I was more unsettled than I had ever been. After that, I did not object to my wife calling a local paranormal group. I still do not fully believe in ghosts, but they were kind people who genuinely wanted to help. They came and conducted an investigation using digital voice recorders and video cameras. For the first hour in a few rooms, nothing happened. Then they asked if we wanted to sit in on a session where they asked questions and reviewed recordings later. During this, one of their flashlights, which had only an on and off switch, suddenly dimmed after a question. They assumed dim meant no and bright meant yes. And when they asked if whatever was there liked the little girl who lived in the house, the flashlight went fully bright again until the next question. This continued for about 30 minutes and felt more surreal than frightening. The final unsettling part was that after the flashlight incident, the entire crew was excited until they realized that every single recording device had its battery completely drained and there was no recording of the session at all. Story 11. One day about a year ago, I was brushing my teeth at my bathroom sink when I looked down at the faucet and saw a figure standing behind my reflection. I thought my hair was somehow reflecting a dark shape, so I moved it back and turned around to see if anything was there, but I saw nothing. I went back to brushing my teeth and looked into the faucet reflection again, and the shadow had moved to the corner of my room. It was tall like a grown man and black, but not completely solid, almost like it had been charred or burned. I panicked and turned around again, but there was nothing in the corner. At that point, I was completely freaked out, so I hurried and finished brushing my teeth as fast as I could. My curiosity got the better of me, and I looked into the faucet reflection one more time. This time the shadow was gone, but there was a dark shape hovering over the rim of my bathtub, and a black, charred-looking hand with long fingers lifted itself up and then disappeared behind the tub. I have quite a few stories from my creepy house if anyone ever wants to hear more. Story 12. I remember a story my dad told me about when he was young, probably a teenager. His father was a mason and carpenter who would buy old, rundown houses, fix them up, and then resell them. One house he bought was an old, massive place, similar to a plantation-style home. My dad said he always felt uneasy in that house, and there were rooms they simply avoided. They tried making his bedroom the top-floor room, but whenever you entered it, there was an overwhelming pressure, that felt like it was pushing down on your entire body. It scared my dad and my grandmother so badly that they moved him to a different room. My dad and grandmother both believed in ghosts and were convinced the house was haunted, but my grandfather was fearless and dismissed it. The house had a basement that no one went into because they could feel something was wrong with it. One day my grandfather decided to go down there with a flashlight to see what was inside. After a minute or two, he came back upstairs visibly shaken, and they moved shortly afterward. He did not talk about what he saw for years, but when he finally did, it was clear it had truly frightened him. He said there were chains on the walls, shackles on the floor, and signs that suggested the house had once been used for something dark and disturbing. He implied there may have been more, possibly remains, but he could not bring himself to say it outright. The strange thing was that the house was in the middle of Ohio and had been built after the Civil War, leaving them with no explanation for what they found. Story 13. A few years ago, I was living in a house with my brother and 4 or 5 other people. He had just finished a shift at Applebee's and got home around 2 in the morning. No one else was there because we had all gone out drinking, so he was alone in a dark, 100-year-old house. He put his music player into its speaker dock and went into the kitchen to get a drink. Suddenly he heard a noise, a low sound that was not quite a growl, but was clearly something organic. It stopped, then started again, this time higher in pitch and fluctuating slightly. He slowly crept through the house trying to find the source, and every few seconds there was another long, drawn-out sound, sometimes low and sometimes high. Eventually he started wondering if a sick or injured raccoon had somehow gotten inside and was hiding in someone's closet. He grabbed a broom for protection and kept following the sound until he narrowed it down to either his bedroom or the room across the hall. He stopped and listened, then heard it again, this time clearly coming from his own bedroom where he had just been. He burst through the door, swinging the broom wildly like a cartoon ninja. It turned out there was a track of whale sounds on his music player, and he had accidentally hit play on shuffle when he set it in the dock. Still, hearing whale sounds echoing through a dark house at 2 in the morning was absolutely terrifying. Story 14. My family owns an old cottage in the country that is extremely creepy. Back in the 1930s, it was owned by a preacher named Joe, who lived there with his mentally disabled son, and both of them died in the house. Strange things still happen there. Doors will sometimes jam and trap you inside a room until you say, "Preacher Joe, let me out," and then the knob will suddenly loosen. The thermostat has switched itself from air conditioning to heat during the summer on multiple occasions, even though it is an old manual dial that has to be physically turned. Radios will change stations on their own, and if you try to play anything other than country music, they will always land on a country station. One night, a neighbor we trusted with a key woke up to every television and radio in the house blasting at full volume, even though all the doors were locked and nothing was missing. Sometimes you can hear footsteps in the kitchen or on the back porch, and it has scared me badly more than once. But no one is ever there. The scariest incident happened when we rented the cottage to a newlywed couple. Late one night, neighbors called the police after hearing a fight in the front yard. The couple claimed they woke up knowing someone else was in the house, even though all the doors were locked, and the husband became convinced his wife had brought someone inside. He ran around the property with a knife looking for someone who was not there, while his wife tried desperately to calm him down. My dad never had the heart to tell them that our family believes the house is haunted. Story 15. We moved into our current apartment roughly 2 years ago, and some pretty weird things have happened, all of them centering around my son, who is cognitively impaired. He is 7 years old but has the mind of a child between 4 and 5 years old. The first time I noticed anything strange was about a month after we moved in. My husband, myself, and our 2 sons were playing, running through the place and laughing. My disabled son, who I will call W, was getting upset that we were not playing the way he wanted. He was in preschool at the time, and his teachers never believed he could act up at home because he was the quiet, sweet one in class. I decided to film him with my phone while he was acting out. The first thing I noticed was white flashes of light around the edges of the screen while the phone was pointed at him, and they only appeared while he was crying. When he started laughing, the lights disappeared. I showed my husband, and he said it was probably the hallway light or something. I had W lie back in the same spot, turned on every nearby light, and recorded again, but nothing happened. I tried again. Still nothing. I asked W to cry, and he pretend cried. Nothing. Then he started screaming while play crying, and suddenly the white lights came back. My husband said it was dust. Not satisfied, I got W worked up on purpose. Nothing cruel, just teasing him a little. He became genuinely upset and started crying for real, and again the lights appeared around the edges of the screen. When I played the video back, I heard a horrible roaring sound when W screamed loudly, something that sounded like a beast. My husband said it was probably him playing with our other son in the other room, but you could clearly hear them laughing at the same time as the roar. I got scared, did not want to overthink it, and deleted the video. About 6 months later, I was home one night with our other son, watching television, when we suddenly heard a loud thump in the hallway. I assumed a toy had fallen and teased him about checking it out, but he was scared, so I went with him. Each boy has a wooden letter on their bedroom door, W for my son W, and his letter was lying in the hallway about 10 feet from his door, which opens inward. That meant it did not just fall off, it went around a 90-degree corner and traveled several feet. My neighbor suggested it rolled, but that made no sense. There is a dent under our thermostat, about 5 feet off the floor, that matches the corner of the wooden letter, like it had been pulled off the door and thrown hard. Last October, W was having a severe tantrum, and I sent him to his room. He kept screaming and crying, so I went in to talk to him. He had a Halloween lantern that played spooky music and sounds for trick-or-treating. Sometimes he needs to be restrained to keep from hurting himself, and he was banging his head on the wall, so I grabbed him. As soon as my arms were around him, the lantern turned on by itself and started playing ghostly sounds saying things like, "Help me." I let him go and ignored the toy, trying to calm him down. But when he started thrashing again and I grabbed him, the lantern went off again, even though it was switched off. About a month ago, W woke up around midnight and asked to sleep in my bed, which he often does since my husband works nights. I was watching shows in the living room, and W was in my bed watching cartoons. I heard him start talking, which he often does to himself or the television, but this time he kept talking and answering questions. I went into my room, turned on the light, and asked who he was talking to. He giggled, looked at the corner above the door behind me, then at the corner above my closet, and said no one. I asked again, and he looked at the same two corners and said ghosts. I panicked and asked if there were ghosts here. He kept looking at those spots and said he was making new friends. I was terrified. I asked if the ghosts were still there, and he got very serious, still staring at the corners, and said they were going to attack our other son, but he was going to protect him. When I asked where the ghosts were, he shook his head and said there were no ghosts. I left the room and went back to the living room, but he continued talking for another 30 minutes, getting quiet every time I muted the television. When I finally went to bed, he lay next to me in the dark, and by the hallway light, I could see him watching those same two corners. Story 16. My grandfather was a mason, and he built a split-level house that I lived in for a while. There was a small room on the lower level with a television, a video game system, and a couple of small fish tanks. We usually left the light off in that room because the lights made an annoying buzzing sound. One night, I was down there playing games with my uncle, and he left to get us late-night snacks, leaving me alone. I heard a scraping noise in the hallway and looked up to see a translucent white form of a woman hovering just outside the doorway. She was not facing me and appeared to be moving toward the bathroom at the end of the hall. I was shocked by how much detail I could see, even though she was partially transparent. She had long flowing hair tucked behind her ear, a delicate nose, a small chin, and a slender figure that faded away below about knee level. The entire experience lasted around 8 to 10 seconds, and while I know there are likely scientific explanations, I was young and impressionable, and the memory has stayed very clear. I do know that one person died in the house, my mother's oldest brother, who passed away when he was 3 years old before my mother was even born, and until my grandmother died of old age a few years ago, that was the only death that ever occurred in the house. Story 17. I lived in the middle of nowhere, literally bordering a national forest on 3 sides with a half-mile-long private driveway. The only issue was that my house sat perched on a hill that was visible from the highway, and it was such an ideal-looking spot that people felt compelled to try to find my driveway once they noticed the house. At first that made me happy, but over time I realized it also meant I was a sitting duck. When I was in my bedroom, it hit me that anyone could sneak up on me without warning, so I started locking my house down like a fortress every night before bed. At night I would hear things, but they usually turned out to be bears wandering around. One night in the dead of winter, I woke up suddenly and sat there in the dark, wondering if I had heard something. I never turned on the lights because that would show exactly where I was. After a few minutes, I convinced myself I had imagined it. It was 3 in the morning. I got up to use the bathroom and walked past a window, and that is when I saw a man standing in the middle of my driveway looking up at the house. The moon was bright and the driveway was covered in snow, so I could see him clearly. I froze completely, knowing there was no way he could see me, and I watched him for about 20 minutes as he stood there, paced back and forth, and knelt down to check behind a large rock. Eventually, he grabbed something from behind the rock, maybe a small bag, and walked back down my driveway. I watched him the entire time and then used binoculars to make sure he fully exited my property, finally seeing him walking away sometime later. Story 18. I have many stories that I cannot explain and that I have blocked from my mind because they terrify me, but this one stands above the rest. Several years ago, my younger cousin, who was 12 years old, was murdered in a tragic and deeply disturbing way. This happened a couple of months before Christmas, and that year the family did not get together because it was too painful with him gone. Shortly after Christmas, we went to my aunt's house, his mother, and she wanted to show us pictures she had recently taken of her Christmas decorations. She did not mention that there was anything unusual in the pictures and wanted to see if we noticed on our own. There were 3 consecutive photos of her Christmas tree, and in one of them, off to the side of the tree, you could see my cousin standing there as a black and gray mist-like outline. The most disturbing part was the expression on his face, which looked angry and deeply upset, as if he were asking how we could have let this happen to him. We were all completely shaken and sat together, trying to process what we had just seen. I was sitting on a couch facing a corner of the room when suddenly there were 3 extremely loud bangs, as if someone was trying to tear the wall down. I have never been that scared in my life. The house was a single floor with no basement, and there was no explanation for the noise. Other strange things involving my cousin have happened since, things I cannot explain, and it really makes you believe there are forces beyond our understanding. Story 19. Many years ago, my brother and I stayed at my cousin's house during summer vacation in a fairly rural area. We all had bikes that we rode during the day, and every night we would lock them to a fence and then go inside to relax in the pillow fort we had built in the living room. One night while we were sleeping in the fort, I heard a bike bell ringing, followed by a kid laughing. It woke me up, and at first I thought I was imagining it, until I realized the others had woken up too. We asked each other if anyone else heard it, and we all described the same sound. It had to be around 2 or 3 in the morning. Everything outside was pitch black, and we only had one flashlight, so we moved slowly and quietly, already on edge. When we reached the fence, we saw my bike lying in the dirt some distance away from where it had been locked. There were no footprints, no tire tracks, no signs that it had been moved. When we checked the fence, my lock was still there, locked exactly where my bike had been. It was as if the bike had passed straight through the lock and ended up where it was. We were too frightened to do anything, so we went back inside and tried to convince ourselves we would figure it out in the morning. A few hours later, my uncle woke us up for breakfast, and none of us had slept. While we were eating, he told us we should not be riding our bikes so late at night. We looked at each other, but did not say a word. Nothing like that ever happened again, but I never slept comfortably in that house after that, and to this day, none of us can explain what happened. Story 20. Not in my house, but in my music studio. I need to clarify this story first by saying that I have never drunk beer of any kind, for reasons that will become clear. My father was a blue-collar, hard-working man who enjoyed Old English. One day he had a bottle in the car, and after finishing it, he threw it out the window at a stop sign, but he missed and hit a pedestrian in the side of the head. The man later died in the hospital. I am not comfortable going into detail about that anymore. My father's mistakes were not my own, and I loved him and know he never meant to hurt anyone. Unfortunately, he did not cope with it and later took his own life, and that is all I will say about that. My music studio is shared with friends, but on this occasion it was just my girlfriend of 4 years and me. I had just written a beat for a guitar riff she came up with, and we were taking a break while she cut tomatoes with a pocket knife, since salt and pepper tomatoes are our favorite snack. I decided I needed to use the bathroom. The studio layout is important. Just past the door, which is secured by 2 external master locks behind plated bolts and 1 key deadbolt, there is a sofa to the right, a large bass amplifier to the left, and a refrigerator in the far left corner facing the door, while the right side of the room holds my drums and guitar amplifier with a television in the center. The room unlocks from the inside, but I always lock the deadbolt because the neighborhood is rough and we have had people barge in uninvited before. I locked the door and went to the bathroom. When I came back, unlocked the door, and stepped inside, the lights flickered off the moment the door opened, something that had never happened before. Before I could reach the light switch, my feet tangled in something that had not been there earlier, and I tripped, flew over the armrest of the sofa, and slammed face first toward the floor. The light came on just long enough for me to see the carpet rushing toward me. My girlfriend had not said a word. I caught my breath and looked up, then screamed when I saw the knife blade that had come within an inch of my eye socket. A tomato lay on the floor, split in half. She was still sitting in the same spot, staring at me in shock. I had tripped over a plastic bag containing 2 full bottles of Old English, and the weight of the bottles had perfectly trapped my feet and sent me flying. To this day, she swears she has no idea how those bottles got there, and neither do I. I drove her there. We entered together, and I knew exactly what was supposed to be in that room. Story 21. I was around 10 or 12 years old, lying in bed in my dad's old house with my back facing my open closet. I started feeling cold, which was strange because we had no air conditioning and it was summer, and the house usually got very warm. It became so cold that I could see my breath. I was too young to fully understand that something was wrong, so I curled into a fetal position to stay warm. Then I felt a tap on my back and assumed it was my dad checking on me, so I turned over. What I saw still haunts me because I cannot explain it. There was a family of ghostly figures staring at me with wide eyes and silent expressions. A little girl brushing her hair, an elderly man in a wheelchair, and a mother standing beside them. I was terrified, but they seemed peaceful, so I stayed still and watched. Then from the corner of the room, another man appeared and slowly walked toward them holding a knife. I could not look away as he stabbed them, yet there was no blood, and after the final blows they vanished. What remained was the man with the knife staring at me and laughing. I rolled over, screamed, and cried for my father. He ran in and demanded to know why the room was so cold and why the floor near my closet was wet. I could not explain it. I never slept with my closet open again, and shortly after that we moved. That house and that night still stay with me. Story 22. This happened to my mother, not me. We are from Long Island in New York, specifically Commack, and when my mother was in high school, she babysat for neighbors down the street. One night, just before putting the children to bed, the phone rang and a detective told her there was a killer or burglar in the area. He asked if anyone else was in the house, and she said the children she was watching were there. He told her to put them in the master bedroom and then asked her to check all the entrances and windows. She set the phone down and ran through the house, locking everything she could find, already panicking. She returned to the phone, which was corded since this was the 1970s, and the detective asked if there was a basement entrance. Terrified, she ran to the basement door to make sure it was locked. She was crying at this point while the detective tried to calm her. Then he told her to turn off every light except the one in the room where they were hiding. She did so and went back to the phone, saying she was going to hang up to call the parents. But before she could, the detective said, "I like your yellow shirt," and hung up. My mother was certain someone was watching her. She immediately called the police, the children's parents, and her brothers who lived nearby. When officers arrived, they searched the property and found footprints in the snow in the backyard, but they never caught anyone. Story 23. A few years ago, my fiancé, our daughter, and I started experiencing what I can only describe as paranormal activity, and it all seemed to center around our daughter's room when she was about 1 year old. Objects in her room would move on their own and end up facing her crib, including a vintage ceramic Virgin Mary statue I owned. Other items would also move around the house, especially old things I had bought from thrift stores or estate sales, which taught me a valuable lesson about bringing unknown objects home. One night shortly after my fiancée and I went to bed, we heard loud thumping coming from her room. We called out to her, but it continued, so my fiancée went to check on her and found her sitting upright in her crib, slamming her head against the back of it while completely asleep. She was in such a deep sleep that even picking her up and carrying her into our room did not wake her, and after that, she began sleeping with us. A few mornings later, when everyone was already up, I felt the sensation of someone lying down next to me, but as I woke up, the feeling vanished. I looked out from our bedroom and saw the bathroom door close by itself. We called a Catholic deacon who came with an approved medium, and she told me that I was also a medium, which was why we were being disturbed. The activity did not stop immediately. That same night, as we were going to bed, we heard a guitar hanging on the wall fall into a toy basket underneath it. But when we woke up, the guitar was still hanging on the wall. We eventually moved, and while strange things still happen occasionally, they are far less frequent now. Story 24. When I was a teenager, before my parents divorced, I lived with them in an affluent suburb of a southern English town. Our house was one of those large, creaky 1920s homes where you constantly think you hear things even when you're alone. It sat back from the road with tall hedges and gates at the front, and the sides and back were enclosed by a high wooden fence, so it felt very secure. It was summer and the family had been outside most of the day, and whoever came inside last shut the conservatory door, but did not lock it. That night I was babysitting my little brother, who was about 7 or 8 at the time, making me around 16 or 17. I planned to lock the door before going to sleep since the neighborhood felt safe. While putting him to bed, we heard a soft bang from downstairs, and my brother said he was scared, but he had always been easily frightened. I told him it was probably one of our cats knocking something over, which happened often since one of them only had 3 legs. He then said he was afraid the man outside was going to come in and murder us. That unsettled me, but I brushed it off because he often said things like that and had stayed up late watching crime shows. The security lights outside had not turned on, so I tried to ignore it. After he calmed down and went to sleep, I stayed in my room but kept hearing strange noises downstairs. Eventually, everything went quiet, but my brother's comment kept bothering me, so I grabbed my dad's cricket bat and went downstairs. What I saw made my blood run cold. Both the conservatory door and the front door were wide open. The front door was thick, solid oak and had been latched, and there was no explanation. Someone had been inside the house and could still be there. Panicking, I shut and locked both doors and called my parents, keeping them on the phone while I checked every room with the bat. Nothing had been touched or taken, which somehow felt even more disturbing. Since then, I never leave doors unlocked. Story 25. This is about my brother Andy and the day he died, and I need to give some background for it to make sense. My brother was 8 years older than me and had a difficult childhood. His biological father left when he was very young, and when he was 6, my mother married my father, whom Andy became deeply attached to. When my mother divorced my father a few years later, it devastated him. He also had serious health issues, being born with only 1 kidney and a pronounced heart murmur that required yearly cardiology visits. When he was 12, doctors discovered severe scoliosis, and he had 2 steel rods inserted into his back, spending nearly a year in a body cast. He began smoking marijuana at 13 and became increasingly rebellious. My mother struggled to control him because he would skip school and go to my grandmother's house, where he was constantly coddled. At 16, he left home to become a commercial fisherman, which was common in our town. When I was 10, my parents remarried and moved 2 hours away, and Andy chose to stay behind with our grandparents when he was not on the boat. So I did not see him often growing up. Over the next 14 years, he continued fishing, smoking marijuana, and developed a gambling addiction, often losing much of his pay before even receiving it. In the summer of 1990, he was badly injured on the boat, suffering a shattered wrist, arm, jaw, and several crushed teeth. He went on workers' compensation and lived with our grandmother, but due to gambling, he wrote bad checks and spent about 30 days in jail. After his release, he wanted to change his life. He experienced episodes where his heart raced and he felt unable to breathe. And because of his heart condition, he went to the emergency room twice. In our small-town hospital, they only ran a basic heart test and told him it was just panic attacks because he was young. Months later, he decided to leave town and move in with us to escape old habits. During the summer of 1991, his compensation payments ended, but he was expecting a settlement check of about $21,000. About a month before he died, I picked him up from visiting an old friend, and he told me he had tried smoking again, but could not handle it because it made his heart race. I did not know about his earlier hospital visits. Over the next month, we got along well and even worked together painting houses. The day before he died, he was excited because his lawyer called to say his settlement check was ready and he would pick it up the next day. That morning, I slept late, and he had already left when I woke up. Around 1:30 in the afternoon, the phone rang, and instantly I felt something was wrong. I insisted on answering it instead of my mother. A nurse from the hospital told me Andy had been brought in 40 minutes earlier and was in cardiac arrest, and that we needed to come immediately. I calmly wrote down the details and told my parents we had to go to the hospital because Andy had suffered a severe heart attack. I drove them there, knowing in my heart that he was already gone, and when I returned from parking the car, a doctor was speaking to my parents while my mother was shaking and crying. Story 26. About 8 or 9 years ago, my brother was coming downstairs in the middle of the night when he saw what looked like me in the kitchen carrying a plate with a sandwich on it. He watched as I walked to the fridge, grabbed a juice box, and then turned to head back upstairs. Thinking it would be funny to scare me, my brother crept back up and hid just out of sight on the stairs leading to the 3rd floor. He heard me start walking upstairs toward my room, and then everything went silent. He never heard my bedroom door open or close, so after a moment he came back down to check, but I was nowhere to be seen. At the time, I had a beaded curtain hanging in my doorway that always rattled loudly when someone walked through it and kept swinging for a while afterward, but it was completely still. My brother went into my room and found me fast asleep, wearing different clothes than what he had seen me wearing in the kitchen. Freaked out, he woke me up, and I had no idea what he was talking about. There was no sandwich or juice box in my room. We went downstairs together to investigate and found no sign that anyone had been in the kitchen making food. To this day, we still have no idea what actually happened. Story 27. My house is pretty old, so everything makes noise, which does not help, but a few genuinely strange things have happened there. One night, my parents went out to a fundraiser, and I was home alone. Their bedroom is right next to mine, and I can usually see the shadow of their feet under my door when they go to bed. I was lying in bed on my phone when I saw the shadow of someone walking toward my bed, and I assumed it was one of my parents, so I asked how their night was. There was no reply. I asked again, thinking maybe they had not heard me, but still nothing. When I started to get out of bed, the shadow turned and walked away. I opened my door and there was no one there, just complete silence in the hallway. Every hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I could almost feel the darkness of my bedroom behind me. I stayed awake with the lights on until my parents came home. Another time, my sister woke the entire house screaming because she said she saw an old man laughing at her in the full-length mirror in her bedroom. We all told her she was imagining it and went back to sleep. On many occasions, my parents' bedroom door has banged violently, usually when their window is open, but when I go up to close it, the window is already shut. As soon as someone checks, the banging stops. This has even happened when a friend was staying over. Both my sister and I once heard a girl crying upstairs when no one was there, and my mother heard heavy thumping in her bedroom while she was alone downstairs. She was so scared she called me to come home, and when I arrived, she was standing outside in the driveway, too frightened to go back inside. Living in my house is definitely not relaxing. Story 28. I lived in an old farmhouse in Detroit, and at the time I was about 11 years old. One day I was sent to my room for some minor trouble and lay on my bed crying. While I was there, I noticed a young male figure standing at the end of the hallway outside my room watching me. At first I thought it was my brother, so I wiped my eyes and was about to yell at him. But when I adjusted my glasses and focused, I realized it was someone I had never seen before. He looked incredibly sad and appeared to be silently mouthing words to me, as if on mute. Everything about him had a brown, sepia-like tone, and he was wearing what looked like a uniform. I screamed and dove under my covers, a scream so intense that my entire family came running. I was completely hysterical. Once I calmed down enough to explain what I saw, everyone laughed and said I had mistaken a dark trash bag in the corner of my room for a person. I was furious and refused to speak to anyone the rest of the day. That evening, my dad, who had his own experiences with strange encounters involving deceased relatives, came to me with a history book and pointed to a photograph, asking if it looked like the man I saw. It was a young man wearing a First World War uniform, exactly like the figure from the hallway. My reaction must have been enough because my dad nodded, closed the book, and never brought it up again. After that, it did not bother me when my siblings teased me, because I knew my dad believed me. I never saw the figure again, and strangely never felt afraid afterward. Story 29. There have been a couple of strange incidents in my house involving what my family believes were spirits. One evening, my mother became heavily intoxicated and took a number of pills because she wanted to end her life. My father was asleep in bed, and it was very late, around 2 or 3 in the morning. He claims he was woken up by a woman sitting at the end of the bed, shaking his leg to wake him. He said he felt unsettled, but also felt like it was a warning. The woman then pulled on his arm, urging him to follow her down the hallway into the living room, where my mother was unconscious, drunk, and had taken the pills. My father believes to this day that this woman saved my mother's life and that she was a spirit in our house. I tend to believe him, especially because I once tried desperately to wake him when I thought someone was outside and could not wake him at all, even though he snores loudly. The second experience was mine and felt much darker. One night I had trouble sleeping and finally drifted off around 3 in the morning, only to wake up feeling like I had left my body. I could stand and walk around my room while watching myself sleep. My bedroom door was slightly open and I heard footsteps, but I knew I was dreaming and thought I was in control. A shadow appeared at the end of the hallway near the conservatory door. I shut my bedroom door, but the figure passed straight through it. I saw his face clearly, an old bearded man who looked like a sailor from another time, with a sinister expression. As he passed through me, I felt an intense cold, and suddenly I was back in my body, paralyzed on my bed, with the man sitting at the foot of it. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. He began humming an old sea song and walked toward my head, leaned close and whispered, "Feel the fear." Instantly, I was inside his body, standing in a port that felt like it was from the 1700s or 1800s. I could feel everything he felt as we unloaded cargo from a fishing boat. People stared at us with hostility. We entered an old tavern where everyone went silent and refused to look at us. The room seemed to shrink. The bar stretched impossibly far away. And when we finally sat down and drank, everything went numb. The man tried to move but could not, and the people around us transformed into horrifying creatures that surrounded us, repeating the words, "Feel the fear." They attacked, and the moment one bit into me, I jolted upright in bed, still unable to scream. The man was there again, humming, then stood and walked through the door and vanished. I checked the house and saw nothing, then turned and saw myself still asleep. I screamed again, shook myself awake, and finally truly woke up, drenched in sweat. My parents ran in seconds later, and I could not explain what had happened. Later, we researched the house and discovered that a fisherman had died at sea and a woman had died in the house, matching both figures we experienced. Story 30. About 7 years ago, I was a young mother living in a small, single-room apartment. My son was about 4 months old and sleeping in his crib nearby. My boyfriend worked late nights managing a restaurant and usually came home very late. Around 1 in the morning, I heard the door unlock and assumed it was him coming home. He got into bed and we fell asleep. Sometime later, I woke up to a noise and wondered if the front door had opened. I stayed completely still, hoping it was just a dream, but then I clearly heard the door close. I whispered urgently to my boyfriend that someone had broken in, and as I did, the light in the living room suddenly turned off. In the darkness, I panicked, fell out of bed, and could not even remember where my baby or the light switches were. My boyfriend grabbed a baseball bat, ran into the living room, flipped on the light, and yelled hello. Sitting on our couch was a man asleep, wrapped in my baby's blanket. He was extremely intoxicated. My boyfriend woke him and told him he was in the wrong apartment, but the man insisted this was his place. As I looked at him, I realized I recognized him. Before my boyfriend moved in, this man had lived across the hall briefly. The drunk man then casually put gum in his mouth, put on his cowboy hat, and walked out. A few weeks later, we ran into him at the grocery store and he apologized, explaining that he had gotten blackout drunk at his brother's bar and a cab had taken him to his old address. It is funny now, but when that living room light turned off, I was absolutely terrified. Story 31. I was living by myself during my sophomore year of high school in my dad's two-story house. He had moved to Texas for work, and I was staying there while we were trying to short sell the place. It probably would not be considered acceptable now, but he supported me financially and I had a car. I was extremely careful about making sure the house was locked every time I left. One night I came home from lacrosse practice and found the front door wide open, with no signs of forced entry. I texted my best friend and told him to call the police if I did not contact him again within 2 minutes. Then I decided to clear the house myself. It was not a smart choice, but I was 16 and in great shape. I stepped over the threshold and yelled that if anyone was inside, they needed to leave because I had a gun and the police were on the way. Immediately after that, I heard the back door slam shut. I never heard it open, and I did not hear the backyard gate slam, which it always did loudly. I texted my friend again and started checking to see if anything had been stolen. Nothing was missing and nothing was disturbed until I went into my sister's old bedroom, which had not been changed since she was 10. Her princess-style bed was unmade, like someone had been sleeping in it. That detail unsettled me more than anything else. To this day, I do not believe a normal person was in my house, because none of it made sense. Story 32. We used to live in an older house, not ancient, but around 60 years old. According to our elderly neighbors, the man who lived there before us was a cruel person who abused his wife and later died of a stroke in the bedroom. Strange things happened from time to time. My mom swore she would see someone moving in her peripheral vision, describing him as tall and broad, wearing what looked like a khaki sport coat. At first we brushed it off because aside from normal house noises, nothing major happened. But things escalated when I was around 12. My bedroom door would sometimes slam shut violently, and I constantly felt like I was being watched. A couple of times I was pushed in the hallway, and it felt deeply hostile in a way I cannot fully describe. We blamed scary movies and drafts, even though my window was always closed. The worst night was during a freezing winter. I was in bed reading fantasy books when I heard scraping noises near the shed outside my window. I assumed it was an animal and tried to ignore it. Later, I heard the shed door open. I was scared but did not want to wake my parents, so I turned off my light and forced myself to sleep. At some point, I half heard the backsliding door squeak, but I was too tired to react. When I woke up in the morning, my small hatchet was lying on my bedroom floor with frost on it, even though it was kept in the shed. I hid it under my pillow and went to breakfast, only to hear my dad shouting outside. Every bladed tool from the shed had been embedded into the wood around my window, axes, hatchets, and trimmers, all stabbed into the siding. The shed door was wide open, and no one could explain how it happened. That was the day my dad allowed me to keep a small rifle in my room. We sold the house soon after, and while packing, we found a khaki sport coat hidden in a corner of the attic, covered in cobwebs. My dad burned it, and we left for good. Story 33. I was living in a house in Oregon near the train tracks with 2 roommates, 1 female and 1 male. My male roommate was incredibly sweet, a bit naive, and very innocent. There was a girl in our social circle who had a huge crush on him, and she invited him out to a bar. Everyone was excited, convinced this was finally his big night. That evening, I ended up staying home with my female roommate instead of going to an event because I was unsure how I would get back. We were sitting in the living room talking around midnight when we started hearing someone banging on the windows and rattling the back door, making a huge amount of noise trying to get inside. We were laughing, assuming our male roommate was extremely drunk and could not figure out how to get in. When the noise moved to the front door and the knob started rattling, I opened the door wide, ready to tease him, but instead there was a strange gutter punk-looking kid, clearly blackout drunk and likely just off a train. He tried to explain that he knew someone who lived there,